In 2008, I launched my own civic ecology practice. Because I'm a professor at Cornell, and because one of Cornell's most beautiful and at times most broken places is the campus gorges, not surprisingly, my civic ecology practice engages students in stewardship of the campus gorges. The students and I help to install boardwalk on wet spots along the gorge trails, and we plant native trees behind Mann Library and around Beebe Lake, and we clean up trash in the campus gorges. The students and I also love hiking and taking in the awe-inspiring beauty of the gorges. We formed a student organization, and we call ourselves Friends of the Gorge. I'm guessing I'm a lot like you in that I try to understand why I do certain things. Like you, at times I simply wonder why I am who I am. And one way that I try to solve this puzzle is by seeking out people, ideas, and theories to help to place my own experiences in a larger context. One of the people I've discussed gorge stewardship with is the Cornell environmental sociologist Rich Stedman. Rich is an expert on sense of place. He talks about how we fight for the places we love, but also he talks about how what we restore places to is based on the meanings, and that is our individual and collective meanings that we attribute to particular places. Restorative topophilia is about how we draw on our attachment to a place and on our memories of what a place once was, or what that place means to us. And then it's about how we invite neighbors and communities to reimagine and restore that place along with its place meanings. Sense of place and restorative topophilia helped me understand why I started my Friends of the Gorge civic ecology practice. In simple terms, I felt a topophilia, or place attachment, to the gorges. And the gorges held meanings for me about hiking and natural beauty. So I was determined to fix up the trails, clean up the litter, and help restore the gorge's natural beauty. In short, I was stricken by restorative topophilia. To help you understand how restorative topophilia is broader than my Cornell example, I want to share with you a very different civic ecology practice. This one's in New York City. On the surface, this civic ecology practice is about restoring a particular species, the eastern oyster, to the New York City estuary. But it's also about the importance that oysters once had to the New York City estuary and waterfront, and about restoring not just the oysters, but also these places. I led a Cornell research project that tried to find out how sense of place and restorative topophilia played a role in motivating the oyster gardeners. Oyster gardeners volunteer to place artificial reefs with young oysters in New York City's waters, and they monitor the oysters' growth and survival. The oyster gardeners talked about how oysters, which historically were super abundant in New York City, had multiple meanings. One oyster gardener talked about hot dogs. He said the oysters were so plentiful that they were very inexpensive and were essentially poor man's food. And I love the fact that they were sold on carts the way they sell hot dogs today. Another volunteer related oysters to social and environmental attributes of New York City as a place. He said, "I think they're a symbol of New York's sort of forgotten waterfront, and an asset that one time fed and made incredible incomes for a lot of people. You know, when you think about New York now, you don't think about the ocean, and you don't think about the Hudson River. You don't think about the estuary, but people used to think about that because of the oysters." This last quote shows how the oyster gardener connected human elements, that's the waterfront, with nature, the estuary, in the meanings he attributed to oysters. So this notion of integrated social and ecological meanings is critical to topophilia, just as integrated social ecological systems is critical to understanding civic ecology practices. Let me share with you one more quote that illustrates how oyster gardeners' meanings, and those related to humans and nature, motivated them to restore the oysters and the estuary. So this gardener said, "If the East River is a living organism, we used to have the largest population of oysters, and we no longer have that." To me, that's almost like cutting out the liver from the human. And if we bring back some life to the East River, then I think that says a lot for our population. That's why oysters are important to me, because I want the river to be healthy again. You can see in the quote how the meanings oysters held for this volunteer. Oysters is the cleanser, the filter, or what he said, the liver of the estuary, were important in motivating him to restore the oyster population and more broadly the larger river ecosystem. Even grander, his volunteer work, which he talked about as saying a lot for our own population, offers hope for humans as a species. But as you'll discover in your journey through civic ecology, and hopefully by personally becoming engaged in a civic ecology practice, things are not simple linear relationships. Place attachments and place meanings may motivate us to restore certain places, but connections to a place and place meanings also may be strengthened or created through helping to restore a place. One oyster gardener put it this way: I've lived here long enough that I'm fairly connected, but not significantly connected. But I would have to say that learning about the oyster culture here in New York City definitely helped deepen my connection to the city. It was also just a way for me to connect with the former role the city had as a seaport. Restorative topophilia is a notion that helps me to understand why I'm engaged in my own Friends of the Gorge civic ecology practice, and why people volunteer for a very different civic ecology practice in New York City. Both practices are about restoring the human or built elements like trails and waterfronts, and the more natural elements like trees in a gorge watershed or oysters in an estuary, of social ecological systems.